what's up? Welcome to my channel. My name is Amanda, and I'm really excited that you decided to be with me today. For today, I want to put two of my plants onto moss poles. I have a Philodendron Majestic that needs to be put up on a pole, and then I have a Monstera Burle Marx flame that I also want to add onto a moss pole. I am going to add some moss into this tote along with some of my fertilizer water, just so this will be able to absorb the nutrients into the moss before we add the plants to the poles and we pot these up into a larger size. So if you would like to stick around and see how somebody else sets up their moss poles or maybe learn something new, please feel free to hang out with me. I would love to have you here, and let's get going. Okay, I am back. I have the moss chilling in here with some water. That moss seems super dry though. I had to add so much water to it before I felt like it started doing anything. For supplies, when it comes to how I set up my moss poles, what you're going to need is some Molly's Aeroid Mix. I switched to this substrate probably a year ago now, and this is all I use besides like Leca or Pon. I do find for me it's a lot easier to just have everything come in a pre-made bag. I place an order for $100 at a time, so I get free shipping, and I get two 10-quart bags of Aeroid Mix and one 10-quart bag of Aeroid Mix. I also use the succulent like rock mix, and I like that really well. But that Molly's Orchid Mix has done wonders for my Hoyas. They absolutely love that substrate. So if you've never tried it before, I highly recommend it. I am obviously not sponsored by this brand or anything. I just really enjoy it. I also use Osmocote just as a slow release fertilizer. Osmocote, in my opinion, really only lasts like 3 months instead of the presented 6 months that it says on here. So where we are in January, I will probably do a sprinkling of more Osmocote on top of all my plants in the spring. So I am still going to add it just because I want these plants to be getting as much nutrients as possible. Next up, you will need 2 Thiccy poles. I'm going to reuse some that I took down from a couple of plants, so they're not the cutest, but they're pre-assembled, and so they're a little bit easier. And then I really like the Repot Me Orchid slotted pots for moss poles. Just the aeration on these is a big game changer on how these plants establish their roots, how they're able to grow, and I really do see a difference. Another cool thing about these pots that I didn't know until I started purchasing them is that they have like a UV ray protection in them, so that the majority of us in the plant community really like things that are clear. But when you use clear pots and you don't have a cover pot, you are subjecting those roots inside to be able to be penetrated by the sun. So that is something I think is really cool to know. So which one should we do first? I think we should do the flame. I think that one will be a little bit easier. So I did grab another gross tote. This one I like never clean out. It's always for like my garbage. And I did water these a couple of days ago, so they are pretty moist. There's a root plug on here, which I don't think, I'm gonna take my watch off actually, which I don't think is like prohibiting the plant from growing or anything, but if I can, I'm going to try to remove it. Since the soil is moist, it may be a little bit more difficult because things may be like really sticking together. And then let's see if I can wind these guys back out. So just so you can see what I'm doing, I'm finding the root that has grown back in one side and then into the other so that I didn't have to break that root system. So let's see what we got going on here. Yeah, this. So the sponge plug is any plant in my collection that has a sponge plug means that I got it from the Green Escape. I'm very surprised that I was able to get a Burle Marx flame from the Green Escape, but hopefully I got it for a really low price. But we'll just take that off. If you don't like to remove like plugs from your plants, it's totally like a personal preference. I know some people that really love them. I would just ensure that whatever is surrounding the roots, that you're able to allow those roots to breathe. So where this one is like that peat moss soil plug, that does hold in and retain more moisture than like the soil that it's in. So especially since I'm getting this on a moss pole where I'm going to be watering it more frequently, I just worry that this plug may do more harm than good for the plant. And so I want to remove as much of that substrate as possible, just so that way I'm not making this more susceptible to root rot or anything by having a denser substrate at the base of the plant. So I think that is pretty good. We got a really nice root system on here. So then with the Repot Me orchid pots, or I guess whichever pot you're deciding to use, when it comes to moss poles, I do not like to use smaller than a 5-inch container. I just feel like if you have the mindset of wanting to build up your plant and allowing it to grow, you need to have a wider base at the bottom. Let's say, for example, that you have taken a couple cuttings, rooted them of a pothos plant, and you're ready to now start them on a pole. The faster you're able to get those cuttings or that specimen onto a pole, the faster it can start sizing up and getting those nutrients from everything that's going to come down in the moss and how frequently you're going to water it. So I would just make sure that you always use a 5-inch. You can put them on a smaller container if you would like to, but as long as you water through the pole and you just monitor how much water is going down the pole, you can kind of stop it before it saturates the soil, and that way you can ensure the plant is not going to rot in a larger pot, but it's still getting the support that it needs for the pole. I hope that made sense. So here's our pot. I'm actually going to put some moss in a pole first. So I'm going to leave the bottom 3 sections open on this moss pole, just so that way that this can go into the soil and roots can grow out and in to just help support this base a lot more. You can fill it from the top to the bottom with moss if that's what you prefer. Again, you just want to make sure that you're not oversaturating this moss pole with those roots, because that dense substrate of the moss can really pull out the oxygen. It will suffocate those roots, and that's what leads to rot. I have found with these thickly grow poles, I use the medium size thickly. There are a couple of my plants that I am going to have to size up to the large thickly pole. I don't really know that the 3.0 version with the front opening would benefit me a lot. I don't sell my plants. I mean, I do sell my plants sometimes, but the purpose of growing my plant on a pole is not to like propagate it. It's just to get it to size up. I do think though, once your plants reach a certain size, that cutting the petioles might be difficult. So you would go through a lot more moss poles, like having to rip through them to get the plant out. So I think when I get larger poles, like for my, I don't know if you can see any of them behind me, for my Philodendron Splendid that's on a pole, I do think when I size that one up, like when I add an extension, I am going to get the thickly 3.0 and the large, just to give it a little bit more structure and stability. And maybe trying the front closure on that one will be a good test. Okay, and then when you're filling the moss in the pole, this is one thing it took me a while to really get right, because I felt like I was squishing out the remaining water when I was putting it in, because you want this to be moist, not wet. Otherwise, you're just going to rot out the side of your plant that's touching the pole. So it is like a good balance of moisture that you need to make sure you're maintaining in the pole, but you're not oversaturating the plant. So what I like to do is once I fill this up, I don't know how well you guys are going to be seeing to see this, but I like to leave little gaps around the front of the moss pole. So that way, when I fill this up with water, there's like little pockets for the water to escape through. So that way the moss is only able to grab and fill up with the water that it needs, and anything extra of me overwatering has a clear path to go out the bottom of the pot and then come out all of this additional drainage. If you overstuff your moss pole, that can lead to a problem as well. So you just really want to make sure that you are filling it to where you can close the tabs, but you don't want to put so much moss in here that you have a really hard time pressing it, or you feel like moss is coming out the front or the bottom. Like if you're pushing it and all of this moss is just falling out of the front, you may want to take a little bit out. I tend to find that if I put too much moss inside of a moss pool, if I'm not able to keep up on watering that moss pool, and once it gets hydrophobic, it is impossible to get it moist again. So if you're not able to keep up on them and ensure that watering is done consistently or every other day or whatever your environment needs, a more thicker moss pool will be a lot harder to maintain, in my experience. But I live in Utah, which is a very dry climate. My ambient air humidity is around 30%. So for me, moss pools, I have to water them every other day in order to keep them some version of moist for my plants. But okay, so we have our pole. You can see that nothing fell at the top. I still have these bottom 3 sections left at the bottom that I'll fill up with that Molly's Orchid mix, and then we'll be able to add the plant and the pole. So since this has been in transit, I'm just gonna give it a good shake and then open it up. I do typically pour these into like a larger plastic tote like this, but since I'm still transitioning into my home office / plant room, the only thing that really has a home is all of my office stuff. Because I've been working, I've slowly been adding things for my plants, but all of my totes are just shoved in this closet. So I'm not able to get to the tote right now, which is why we're just gonna shake this one up and take it directly out of the bag. Okay, now that I have my substrate, I'm just gonna keep it over here next to me on the floor, and I'm just gonna use my hand to feed this through. Some of the substrate will fall through these like front grids, so I do like to turn my pole over and just tilt it down slightly so the moss is over my container of moss. So if anything falls out, it doesn't really make that much of a mess. And then this is going to be messy because I spill, but I do try to hold it over the pot so that I make the least amount of a mess as possible. The other reason why I really like Molly's mix, I mean, it's a good mix in general, but for moss poles, it does also contain charcoal. So charcoal is a very good fungal property for plants. It helps keep just like a really nice working clean ecosystem in your plant soil, and so I find that that really benefits plants on poles, especially since there's so much moisture coming in and out. And I guess I can show you guys what the mixture looks like. Let me grab a handful of it. But so this is going to be what the substrate looks like. There's leca in here, orchid bark, and then some of those other goodies, charcoal, perlite, and cocoa chips are in here as well, I believe. But yeah, I really liked it since I purchased it. And it seems that my plants really like it as well. So the next thing when you're establishing your plant onto a moss pole is, I know that a lot of people prefer to put their moss pole right in the center, moss pole in the back of the pole rather than in the center. I'm able to help hold up the petioles and keep all of the moss poles like tight and confined, so it isn't like expanding and taking up a whole bunch of space. So I'm going to put a little bit of that at the bottom. And then where I have these aerial roots on the Monstera, that's where I want to line up directly on the moss. So I'm going to put this root system down here in the bottom. And then that first note that I have, I'm going to push into this one. And then the second one will line up. So this is what we are working with for my plant. I do try to center it onto the pole. So since there are 4 grids on here, I will put one aerial node into the center right and then another aerial node into the center left. So that way, hopefully this will continue to grow straight and just look really nice and full. This also allows it, if the plant starts to split or grows out in any way, I have another section of grids that I can use to just help keep everything nice and tidy as well. So that will stay in. So I'm just going to add some Osmocote really fast. Before last year, I didn't use any type of fertilizer. I didn't use a slow release or like a liquid fertilizer, but I am amazed at what a difference it does to your plants. So if you haven't tried a fertilizer or you're afraid to try a fertilizer just because there are like, I don't know, I feel like there are so many out there and sometimes it's hard to know like what you're getting. They are also expensive, so sometimes it's like, do I really want to waste my money on a fertilizer when I could go buy a new plant or I could buy a cute decorative pot? You know, so I totally get it. There's other things in the planting world that you want to spend your money on, but if you want large plants, you definitely need a fertilizer. I would be happy to go over the fertilizers that I have and that I use. I'm looking into a new one specifically for my Hoyas, just a fertilizer that will help those plants bloom. I do have a couple of Hoyas that are like, I don't know, they just are self-bloomers. They just love it, I guess. But a couple other ones that I would really love to see the blooms. They may not be established enough. They're pretty small specimens. But anywho, I'm looking to get a fertilizer to help specifically with that. So if you guys are watching my channel and you like the content that I've been providing so far, if you would like me to create a video on fertilizer or just kind of, you know, break down what I'm using for my collection, I would love to do that for you. Just let me know in the comments if there's any interest. So one thing that I did forget to grab was my grafting tape. So I'm just going to jump up here and grab it, and then I'll be right back to show you how I put it on. So this is grafting tape. I buy this in a 2-pack off of Amazon. I think it's like, I don't know, $5 or $6. It's not very expensive. It is basically saran wrap, but I love that it's, I don't know, like an inch wide. It makes it really easy to use, and this seals in moisture like nobody's business. So where these aerial roots are pushed up against this moss right here, I'm just gonna wrap this around a couple of times just to ensure that this plant is able to root into the moss pool. And those roots can start like establishing themselves to help the plant size up. Once these nodes root into the plant, I'll take this off. So it's not like a forever solution for your plants or something that you always have to look at. It's just until those nodes grow in, and then you can remove it. I do try with my plants when I see a new like growth point coming out with a new node. I do try really hard to wrap it in grafting tape just so it helps stick to it a little bit better, but I'm not always the greatest at it. So I'm going to add a little substrate back here for the hole to be more stable. So here is this one. It's very, very small. It wasn't a big like, oh my gosh, it's on a pole. But I am excited to see this one start to just climb and get really, really big. I think these plants are so beautiful when they're established. So I'm hoping now that I'm giving it a little bit more care that it will be able to give me the growth that I need. This is not even, so I'm gonna just shove this piece of orchid bark right here just to make it like straight. Otherwise it will bug me. There we go. And then for cash pots or cover pots, I do prefer the IKEA, like just their basic pots. I went and picked up a whole bunch of them a month ago probably now with my kids. We went down to the aquarium and I stopped at IKEA for a pickup order, and all I bought were 5 or 6 inch pots. The people looked at me like I was crazy, but I needed all of them. So I purchased for this space the accent wallpaper that I've picked out to go on this back wall. Has oversized flowers on it. I believe that they're peonies, but they have a really pretty light lilac to a deep purple, and then like some blushes and a really pretty mustard. So the colors that I picked out for my pots were the blush pink and the lilac that they had at IKEA. I know the majority of people go for white, but I really love color, and I think color looks really pretty with the greenery from plants. So here is our first one. I'm gonna need to water this one through still, but since I just watered it the other day and the soil was pretty moist, I think it will be fine. Just chilling in here for a second while we pot up the other one. Oh wow. This has like no roots on it. Okay, not what I was expecting. Let's see this one. Okay, so this one has some roots. But you know what? We're already here, so I think I'm just gonna add it into Molly's aeroid mix anyways. Not only can this establish itself in the pole, but you can propagate plants in soil. So I think as long as I ensure that the soil doesn't get really dry and kill these little baby roots, we should be fine. So due to that, I'm gonna make the moss pole first for this one. So let's move this down here. I can't believe that one doesn't have any roots on it. I guess I should show you a little bit more up close if you're not familiar with Thiccy. So again, this one's used, so it has like hard water stains on it for me cleaning it out. But Thiccy does have these little slots here at the top. This is how you connect the poles together, is they click into this little space. This section right here is going to be how this anchors into the soil, these little tabs. But this is what you will click into this top part if you're doing an extension. And then it just has little brackets on the back where you'll slide these in, and then a grid on the front for the aerial roots to grow into. I keep the tabs down at the bottom just to help anchor into the substrate a little bit more. So I like to fold those out. And then I'm gonna again leave the 3 bottom tabs clear of anything so that I can put that Molly's aeroid mix in there. I made some extra moss because I do have a couple of extensions that I need to do as well. But I'm trying to figure out what to do with my Splendid. So I'm at the point with a couple of my plants, if anybody has any advice for me, that are on poles that I need to decide if I'm going to chop the bottom. So I don't know if I should like extend the top and then wait for it to start like getting new growth and then I chop the bottom, or I chop the bottom, pull out the roots from the base, establish that, and then add an extension. I don't know. I don't really know what to do here. But my Monstera Esqueleto, I definitely need to do something with. And the reason why I need to chop the bottom, on my Splendid, I found what I thought was one thrip. I totally freaked out because I've never had thrips before. So I sprayed the crap out of it and then I left it in the bathtub for a couple of days so it could like dry off and quarantine. And since they're like velvety leaves, they just got a little damaged from being wet. They did not like that. And then some of them I think just fell off because of stress. Like I got a lot of yellow leaves, but it only happened at the base of the plant. So I feel like I could just chop it at the bottom and pot it up, but I am very close to the top, so. But my assumption is that if I chop the base and I pull the roots out of the moss pole, that the plant will need to establish more roots inside of the pot so it won't push out new growth. So an extension won't be as much of an immediate need as having like foundational roots in the bottom. But I don't know. This is a whole new world for me of moss poles. I've never gotten this far with them before. Actually, with this one, I'm going to add a little bit more moss. I think I'm only going to do the bottom 2 with Molly since this one doesn't have a lot of roots. So I'm going to pivot for just a second. And let me add this in the bottom because it's going to be pretty messy. Ooh. Okay, it's a little bit better, I think. One of the things I don't like about moss poles is how dirty your hands get. Like, I like to feel the substrate and everything, but trying to move from one thing to another, I'm like, what do I do with my hands? Maybe I'm the only one that feels like that, though. And I forgot the tab at the bottom. Rookie move. And this step, I feel like, is something that can be easily overlooked when you're putting a plant on a pole. But I would just make sure you're lining up the aerial roots with the section on the grid of how you kind of want your plant to grow. This is the foundation of your plant being on a moss pole. So you just really want to make sure, however you're setting it up to look aesthetically, that that is something that you would like to look at. Obviously, the plant is going to like change and do its thing because it's a living organism, but with the moss pole, you do have a little bit more control to move it around and manipulate it, especially when you're first putting it on. So just really take your time with that initial setup and making sure that you line everything up just the way that you want it. Because once the plant does get established and these petioles start to get really thick, it is a lot harder to move the plant around or to get it to shift back onto the pole. So again, just making sure that that foundational setup is there really does help support the plant and also ensure that you like to look at your moss pole. Moss poles are a big statement piece, so I think it would be really frustrating to have a plant that's on this beautiful moss pole and then you don't necessarily like the way that it's growing or don't like the way that the petioles are winding around a certain section. It would just be a bummer to go through all of that work to have to take it back off and start over. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my grafting tape. And so right here at the base, I have both of these plants that have an aerial root. So I'm just going to make sure that they line up in their own little square on this grid, and then I'm going to wrap the grafting tape around the base. I was afraid I was going to launch that at the camera. Okay, and then I have two more nodes right up here. So I'm going to put some more grafting tape up on this one as well. And if you are setting up a new plant on a moss pole, I would recommend doing no more than like 3 cuttings or parts of the plant on here. It's just once that plant really does start to size up and get mature, having more than 3 stems to navigate up a pole is really hard. That is also a lot of nutrients that you would have to give your plants because once they get established in the pole, those roots inside of the pole need nutrients just as much as the nutrients in the soil. So if you have a lot of foliage fighting for all of those nutrients inside of the pole, it isn't the most successful setup for your plant. Okay, and then I have one more section up here that I'm gonna put on. Okay, now I didn't pop that up all the way because I wanted to be able to move the pole around as I was wrapping the grafting tape. So now that all of the nodes are established on the pole, I'm going to secure the pole a little bit more with the soil. Okay, and there is my Majestic. The leaves are a little wonky, but once I put them back over here with my other moss poles, all of these leaves will fill in the front as all of these leaves start to face towards the light. So it will look really nice and full, at least at the bottom. So there is one last look at the pole. We have my Monstera Burle Marx flame and my Philodendron Majestic. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I hope that you learned something new about moss poles. And if you have any questions on any of the products that I used or anything that I mentioned in the video, please leave a comment down below. I would love to engage with you guys about plants. I don't have any planty friends in my personal life. So I'd really love to talk about plants with anybody who would like to. But thank you so much for sticking around with me while I did this, and I hope that I see you in the next one. Bye!